What's up, everybody? Thanks for joining me on these analysis. We're going to be looking at MSTR, Microstrategy, as well as Bitcoin. Talk about some speculative price targets and what we could potentially see playing out with different deviations based off of the ballistic acceleration model. So we ended up having a pretty decent close on the week as we were down on Thursday, and then we kind of recovered a little bit on Friday. Still underneath our golden zone, which we need to break through for sure, so we can finally get some relief as price breaks above that, retest and push up higher. Right now we are starting to see this downward sloping trend line start to form. As you can see, we've kind of been touching it a couple times. So let's see what happens when we touch it again. And coincidentally, it's within this golden zone to the downside. You have confluence to the downside. You have this golden zone that's wanting to push price downward, and you have a downward sloping trend line, which is of course bearish until broken. But I do think with all this buildup and sideways action, when we finally do break out, it could be a violent move once we break above 450. Of course, it doesn't have to play out like that, but just in terms of TA and just general price discovery, it's pretty much looking like it could have an aggressive move once we break out of this golden zone and this last level of resistance, and then of course once we get to all-time highs. But as we break 450, it looks like a pretty clean move, as you can see here on the daily, so we should be able to rally up pretty nice. On the weekly, we're still well above our 20-week SMA. We're still holding above our 50, but we're slightly underneath our 20. Hopefully we can get that push above this week. Best case scenario would be closing back inside of this golden zone, and the most bullish case possible would be closing above it. But I don't know how likely that is, especially the way that price action has been acting. We just need Bitcoin to really take off and see some crazy moves. Just like we've spoken about previously, these golden zones, you can see that we made it to the 2618, the 2272. Yeah, we made it to the 3272 or almost to it. This is where price closed at. It closed by the 2618. If you want to talk about the threes, then maybe that's where we get a blow off top potentially. If we get some very bullish momentum with a slowdown on the ATMs on the common shares, then I could potentially see that happening. But if we continue to issue out ATM offerings on common shares, then maybe that's not going to be the case. We'll see, of course. If this were to play out just like these previous moves, then you're talking about getting a close on a weekly or a daily candle anywhere between the 2618 and the 2272, potentially seeing a blow off top at 1500. Like I said, these are speculative ideas. They do not have to play out, but keep that in mind. I don't think anything has really changed. This is still very bullish price action. Honestly, this pullback makes me believe that we could actually go even higher because it's letting price cool down. When you look at this move, if you know anything about like general TA, you know that this move isn't sustainable. When you're talking about from September 9th all the way to November 18th, that's insane, of just nonstop green candles week after week. You know that's not sustainable. So at some point you're going to get a major pullback. When you're stair stepping up like this, you have more support underneath you. So when that crash does come, that maybe the crash won't be as severe because you have support if we continue to stair step our way up and then eventually get our blow off top. So I think it's a good sign that we're seeing a pullback already, because if we can push up again, a nice little pullback, and then maybe a blow off top, maybe we can reach higher targets than we even anticipated. Like I said, these moves, the most aggressive part happens in the last 2 to 3 weeks, so keep that in mind. And I still think we have some time before that even happens. So let's see if we can get it by Q3, anticipating that it's front running Bitcoin's move. And onto Bitcoin, we've talked about this before, but you can see once Bitcoin kind of gets in its little momentum of breaking recent all-time highs, or not recent all-time highs, but recent highs here, you can see a push up of 26% from this wick to the next area is about 50, 55%. If you want to take it from this wick, you could take it from down there, but we'll say from here. Another 50% from this wick here. Take it up 48%. And from here, what if we do anywhere from, we'll say, 25%, which would be 135, and then maybe 40%, 153 or something like that, and then 50%, 163. So if we were to take those numbers, 135, our first target, we're just going to say, right? 135 from this high here, we'll plug it into the ballistic model. I know we deviate from it time and time again. It happens. But if we're at 135, that's going to give you about 857. And if you deviate it 15% to the downside, you get 728. And if you deviate it 15% to the upside, you get 985. If we were to hit 135K and we continue to have a 15% deviation to the upside or downside, we could be sitting within that range. So it gives you a ballpark. If Bitcoin's sitting at 135, then that would put MSTR at 728 or about 985. So the next one is 40% gain. So 153, we're just going to take 150K because that's where the model has stopped now. They lowered the number from 200K. Understandably so, I can see why. The other numbers were pretty insane. I mean, I still think it's possible if the MNAV, it really depends on the MNAV. If MNAV goes crazy, then anything's possible with this stock. We'll just take 150K, we'll do 1100 and deviate it 15% to the downside and 15 to the upside. If you do 15 to the downside, then you get 935 to 1265 on the 15% deviation to the upside. So MSTR could be sitting at 935 to 1265 if Bitcoin's hitting around 150K. And if we did the last one, which is a 50% move from this wick, we're just taking it from what we've seen, time and time again, ever since pretty much January 2023. It's just been consistently happening. We had the lowest one, which was 25%. And then on average, it was anywhere from 40 to 50%. 50% takes you to 165. That's above the model. So I just kind of threw out like a realistic random number based off of this. I just added 150. So at 165K Bitcoin, I was saying 1250 on MSTR, deviating 15% to the downside and 15 to the upside. To the downside, you'd have 1062 as your lower range, up to 1437. Remember, these deviations, this could be for like one day or something. So you have to be able to recognize that when you're sitting at 135 or 160 or whatever you're at, and you see, okay, we're supposed to be sitting at 773, but we're overvalued by 15%. That is that moment where you have to take that into consideration, and you could take advantage of it and perhaps sell part of your portion and take a little bit of profits. So remember, you never go broke taking profits. So remember that. And you always got to remember the crappy times, the shitty times where we're going down, sideways. You just don't want to get too greedy when things actually start going your way, because when things go your way, it's for such a short period, you have to capitalize on it. But like I said, for 165K Bitcoin, we could be looking at a range of 1062 to 1437. So keep that in mind. Those are possible targets on MSTR. And just to give you a visual of what that might look like, the first target, like I said, was 728 to 985. So you're talking about an 88% gain. To me, that's very, very doable on MSTR. That's 135K Bitcoin, which I think is very possible. To 985, which is a little bit higher. Of course, it's a 15% deviation to the upside, and that's a 150% gain. So that's what we could be seeing on 135K Bitcoin. Remember, this could be a wick and then push back down or something like that. 153K Bitcoin is 935. So you're sitting around here, 150% gain to 1265, which takes you to way higher targets at the top of the range almost, depending on when we hit that target. And 165 Bitcoin takes you to 1062. So you're almost at the top of the range, all the way up to 1437, which would be probably a major blow off top. And then I would imagine if we get something like that, then we get an aggressive move to the downside, and we could potentially retest this trend line here, and we kind of repeat the same move potentially, if this is a right translated cycle. Of course, we'll find out with time. But right now, the economy is holding up, so right now, this looks like the potential outcome of a large move up, going sideways or downward. We don't know how deep of a pullback, and then a next move up. Now, in terms of a pullback, if we check out this last move here, you can see we made it to the 618, 0.5 to 618, and the initial move, 0.5 to the 618. So if we were to run up, depending on which target, so we'll just say the first one, 985, we'll say that's the top, and then we pull back, 0.5 to 618 takes you back to 600, all the way down to about 520. If we're sitting in the range of 935 to 1265, if we make it all the way to 1265, then we're looking at a pullback from 747 to 620. And if we make it all the way to 165K Bitcoin and MSTR is still doing its job, and we're in the range of 1062 to 1437, you can see that that would take you all the way up here. And your pullback to the golden zone could be anywhere from 830 to about 686. Of course, give or take, we can pull down a little further down than 68 or 680 and push down maybe to 590, then push up. Who knows? There's always variations to everything, but there's just a simple guideline. We're just talking numbers and talking about possible scenarios and outcomes. For this pull on Bitcoin, you can see we made it up to the 3272. And then on this pull here, we made it to we're still at the 1618, but if we were to make it to the 3272, that takes you to 214K to about 200K, right? If that were to play out. If that were to happen, and then we do that 214, and then we pull this next fib, this is a very long shot that you're talking about the next 4 or 5 years out. For instance, let's say 214 is our cycle top, right? That means we go up another 100% roughly. Let's say we make it all the way up here and we're pulling from the top of this fib. And that wouldn't even be at the top of the channel. So that would be somewhere in this region over here. 214. If we pull that fib, then the next top call based off of making it to the 3272 would be much higher at the 600K mark for the next cycle. How realistic is that? Not too sure. Anything's possible with Bitcoin. This thing really ramps up, as you guys can see, when you have a long cycle in the right direction. But you can see that 3272 takes you to 214. That next one takes you to about 600K, which is nuts. Not saying it's going to play out, but just want you guys to get some eyes on how it would look after a cycle top at around low 200K, which I think is possible if we get the right economic data to continue coming out and, mass adoption and all that kind of stuff continues pushing forward. But right now, as we look for what's to come on Bitcoin, we got our bounce off of our 50, which is very bullish. We got one bounce here, second bounce here, and now we're compressed between the 50-day and the 20-day. It looks like we keep testing this 20-day, but its confluence with this horizontal level of support and resistance keeps pushing us back down. Let's see if we can break above it. When you look to the left, if we break above this and get a close, we could get a bounce off of this level and potentially a clean move when you look to the left-hand side. Not too many wicks going on here, clean traffic. So that would probably encourage price to have a clean move to the top of the range and then see where price takes us from there. If we make it to the top of the range, of course, we have to worry about this level where we could potentially get resistance, some kind of bounce, maybe create a bull flag and then try breaking out. So we'll see where things take us, of course. But overall, I remain bullish on Bitcoin. I don't think anything's really changed. especially when you take a look here at the fear and greed index. We're sitting at neutral right now, and Bitcoin's at 105K, and we're at a 50 mark right here. So that's pretty insane. When you take a look here, last time we were at 50 before we took off in November, that was at around 67K, and then Bitcoin made it ultimately to about 100K. It went up to 98,000 from 67K to about 98,000. So we went from a 50 to an 88, and that's just the beginning of the, that's you just breaking into the extreme greed. It ended up going up even higher. So we'll see. I mean, it has touched 90. Like I said, I still remain bullish on Bitcoin overall. I don't think anything's really changed. We're creating a bull flag right now, getting a lot of resistance. You see all these wicks down here. Looks like price keeps bouncing off this level. Of course, the more we test this level, the more likely we are to break through, retest, and push on down. But hopefully we can start testing the top of the range and eventually break out of there. And then we're going to run into that next level of resistance that I was speaking of at around, it all depends on where we touch it, but it'll be this white upward sloping trend line here. So it could be anywhere from 117 to 120 whenever we touch it. And then I think ultimately once we break that, then we're in the full price discovery, and there's going to be really no sense of where things could go. It's just going to be based off of fibs. So we'll be pulling a lot more fibs. We already pull a lot of fibs as is, but we'll pull more fibs. You can see maybe you get resistance at the 1272, maybe the 1618 could be the next area to stop at once we break out of there, which is at around that 146 level, and so on. Like and subscribe if you guys enjoy this kind of content. Share with a friend, comment, and I'll see you guys in the next one.